Around 10,000 BCE, most humans still lived in small, mobile communities. People differed in skill, age, influence, and possessions, but extreme inherited fortunes were hard to preserve. A family could not carry fields, granaries, or thousands of animals when it moved. By 2500 BCE, the picture was different. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, rulers controlled large estates, temples collected grain, officials recorded taxes, and laborers supported courts, armies, and monuments. Some children were born into households with land, servants, and political connections. Others inherited debt or dependence. How did ordinary differences become permanent inequality? The answer was a chain, not a single cause. Food became storable. Storage made property durable. Durable property could be counted, defended, and inherited. Bad harvests created debt. Administrators recorded claims. Institutions justified rank. Organized force protected the resulting order. Mobile hunter-gatherer societies were never perfectly equal. Skilled hunters, healers, elders, and persuasive speakers could gain prestige, and violence or domination could exist. But mobility limited material accumulation. Heavy possessions slowed travel, food spoiled, and an overbearing leader could sometimes be abandoned. Many communities used leveling practices. Meat was shared, boasting was mocked, and successful individuals were expected to give rather than hoard. These customs did not erase all differences, but they made it hard for one household to turn a temporary advantage into lasting control over land, food, and labor. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Anatolia, built from around 9600 BCE, shows that hunter-gatherers could organize large ritual projects before full farming. So hierarchy and coordination did not begin on the first day of agriculture. What farming changed was the durability and scale of advantage. Between about 9500 and 7000 BCE, communities in the Fertile Crescent increasingly cultivated wheat and barley and kept sheep and goats. Stored grain reduced seasonal hunger and preserved calories for months. But a storehouse created a political question. Who controlled the door? Someone had to guard grain, count contributions, reserve seed, and decide when food was released. That role could begin as service and become leverage during drought or conflict. Land changed the calculation as well. A field contained cleared soil, irrigation channels, and accumulated knowledge. Leaving meant losing years of labor. People became tied to specific plots, canals, and villages. In southern Mesopotamia, after about 5000 BCE, irrigation supported larger populations but demanded coordination. Canals needed maintenance, and upstream decisions affected downstream farmers. Temples and palaces became major landholders and distribution centers. They collected produce, employed workers, and managed herds. The new system increased total production, but it also gave the institutions controlling storage and water the power to reward, delay, or exclude. A rich individual does not create a permanent class unless advantages survive death. Inheritance supplied that bridge. Land, houses, livestock, tools, offices, and obligations could pass to children. One generation's harvests and alliances now shaped the starting position of the next before birth. At Varna, on the Black Sea coast, graves dating roughly from 4600 to 4300 BCE contained strikingly unequal quantities of copper and gold. One male burial held far more metal than most others. The graves do not reveal an entire political constitution, but they show concentrated wealth and status well before the first empires. Marriage became part of the same system. Elite families joined estates, offices, and alliances through sons and daughters. Kinship became political infrastructure. Gender inequality often deepened where property and inheritance passed mainly through male lines. This was not universal, and women in several ancient societies could own land, do business, or hold religious office. But many legal systems gave men stronger control over household property, children, and succession. Agriculture produced surplus and catastrophic risk at the same time. A failed harvest could leave a family without food, seed, or taxes. Borrowing grain or silver solved the immediate emergency. If the next harvest also failed, interest and penalties could turn misfortune into dependence. Mesopotamian records from the 3rd and 2nd millennia BCE. Document loans, pledged fields, debt service, and bonded labor. A debtor might surrender land, work for a creditor, or give a family member as security. The wealthy survived bad years because they possessed reserves. Poor households sold assets when bargaining power was lowest. Repeated shocks transferred land and labor upward, even without a single planned seizure. Ancient rulers sometimes canceled personal debts and restored land, not simply out of generosity, but because if too many farmers lost freedom or fields, the state lost taxpayers, soldiers, and food production. By about 3200 BCE, writing in southern Mesopotamia was used heavily for accounting. Clay tablets tracked grain, animals, workers, and rations. Records allowed institutions to coordinate thousands of transactions, but they also made obligations durable. A spoken claim could be disputed. A sealed tablet could be stored and enforced years later. Literacy and archives gave specialists power because ordinary farmers could not always challenge the records made about them. Taxation converted recurring production into state revenue. Households delivered grain, animals, labor, or silver. These resources financed canals, walls, temples, officials, and soldiers. Public works could protect and feed communities. The same system could also compel labor. Early Egyptian kings unified much of the Nile Valley around 3100 BCE, and the Great Pyramid of Khufu, built around 2600 BCE, still shows how much labor a centralized hierarchy could command. Law formalized social categories. Hammurabi ruled Babylon from 1792 to 1750 BCE. His law collection regulated contracts and responsibilities, but it also assigned different penalties according to status. Inequality became an official feature of society. For ordinary people, hierarchy was physical. A tenant farmer surrendered part of the harvest. A textile worker received measured rations. A conscript lost months of household labor. A debtor risked land or freedom. A slave could be bought, inherited, or punished. Inequality was not only about luxury objects. It shaped time, diet, bodily safety, legal protection, and the ability to refuse. A hierarchy lasts longer when people see it as legitimate. Kings presented themselves as chosen by gods, defenders of justice, or guardians of order. Priests linked harvests and stability to sacred ritual. This does not mean religion was merely a trick. Rulers and ordinary people could sincerely share the same worldview. But the political effect was powerful. Obedience became morally meaningful, not just physically necessary. Legitimacy reduced the cost of rule. Force remained behind the system. Palaces controlled armed retainers, prisons, and punishments. Tax refusal, Flight or rebellion could lead to confiscation, enslavement, or death. The winners included rulers, major landholders, temple institutions, successful merchants and officials who controlled records. The costs fell most heavily on debtors, tenant farmers, captives, slaves, and households without reserves. Material inequality became easier to see as settlements grew. Large houses occupied more space and stored more food. Elite graves contained imported objects, weapons, and ornaments. Monumental tombs turned family rank into a public statement that survived the dead. In early dynastic Ur, around 2600 BCE, the so-called royal cemetery contained richly furnished burials with gold, lapis lazuli, musical instruments, and attendants. The exact interpretation of individual graves is debated, but the contrast with ordinary burials is unmistakable. Wealth also changed political influence. A household with surplus grain could lend seed, sponsor feasts, and support armed followers. A temple or palace with large estates could employ dependents year after year. Economic resources purchased loyalty, and loyalty protected economic resources. Specialized offices made this cycle even stronger. A scribe's skill took years to learn. An administrator understood records and procedures unavailable to most farmers. When offices became associated with particular families, knowledge and authority could be inherited alongside land. That is the core answer. Human societies became unequal when temporary differences were tied to durable property, inheritance, debt, administration, law, and force. Farming mattered not because it instantly created hierarchy, but because it made wealth storable, defendable, and transferable across generations. Once surplus, records, legitimacy, and coercion reinforced one another. Inequality no longer depended on one unusually successful person. It became a system capable of reproducing itself.